Greetings, fellow informed. Today I'm going to be discussing something which is really mentioned in the books of history, and that is how my people, the Scottish, were enslaved. Or at least some of them anyway. See, the slave trade, as we're all told, is of course a matter of white privilege, and we should all feel very guilty for it. But as somebody who comes from a nation that is essentially oppressed, because let's not lie, up until recently, Scotland had very little representation in its wider United Kingdom Parliament, and that makes things very difficult. The matter of Scottish slavery is never really discussed. It's sort of hidden away. The reason for that's very simple, is Scottish enslavement, while it wasn't industrialised, like, let's say, something like the African slave trade, was still a thing that happened, and essentially it was ruled by the British classes, essentially the upper classes, that they would get rid of anyone that they seemed to be problematic, or anyone who posed a threat to society. So we all know the stereotype that Australia is made out of criminals, but there was also another route that people were sent, and that was to the Americas, to the Caribbean. See, a lot of Scottish people were taken as slaves. By that time, the rule of law was already being established in the United Kingdom and in Europe, so simply killing these people wasn't an option, as it would have been deemed socially and morally wrong in both the eyes of the state and the eyes of the church being something that played a vital role back then. See, as a white individual who came from nothing and managed to educate himself into having a decent quality of life, I get very offended by this concept of white guilt, especially considering the atrocities that have taken place against my people. See, the thing is, we don't feel sorry for ourselves here in Scotland. Yes, we want more power over our own lives, but we don't hold it against anyone. And this is one of the main differences that perhaps you may see in the PC SJW campaigns. It's very much a cult of oppression and fear, and that, while it works temporarily, doesn't always win. See, what you would notice, Scotland's an interesting example of politics in a wider spectrum. See, to the north of the border you have the Scottish National Party, which is a centre-leaning left party, whose dedication to public services and a strong economy is something that many have taken a very keen interest in. And in the last parliamentary election, something I campaigned for, they actually won an overwhelming majority, as they have for the last several years, in Scotland for the Westminster Scottish parliamentary seats. But still, with that majority, their voice is very small. Out of the 650 odd seats that's in Parliament, only around about 50 of those, I may have my numbers wrong, go to Scotland. You can understand the underrepresentation argument. But where's the point in this? Where's the point in this video? Well, it's to demonstrate that yes, oppression does happen, but it's how you go about it and how you try to resolve it and what you take from it. See, Scots, like myself, are free men. We do not believe in having chains, and that's something that's very deeply embedded in our cultural atmosphere. So when I see the PC Brigade and the SJWs telling me that because I'm white I should somehow feel guilty, it's just not acceptable, nor is it true to history, as mentioned, there were Scottish slaves in the Americas. And it wasn't just Scottish, it was Irish, it was Jews, even the English, some of their people became slaves, although more often they were sent to Australia. So as a matter of fact, it's not necessarily anything to do with race, although I will give concession that indeed, in some parts of the world there is legitimate racial diversity issues, or oppression. And yes, there may be some systemic things within certain organisations that prevent people of colour from achieving great things. But that's not a race issue, that is a class issue. Very fundamentally different things. See, in the class issue, the people at the bottom, it doesn't matter what colour your skin is. You're all fucked. It's like myself, as mentioning before, I came from a very poor background, not to the detriment of my parents who tried very hard. But the simple fact is, the way you're born is a very key part of the cards you're dealt with. For me, I was fortunate enough that in Scotland we have universal education, so I was able to propel myself up, and I still am as I'm approaching the end of my degree. Part-time, I also work full-time, as the importance of combining the two in my mindset. But going back to the whole concept of white privilege. There's no real thing as white privilege. It's just demographics. See, countries that have more white people, well, of course you're going to have more white politicians and more white CEOs and more white managers. The rule of thumb when it comes to statistics says that the higher number tends to win. But of course, that's just sort of cast aside because people feel this victimhood, this professional victimhood. But at the same time, how can they be oppressed? It's like Anita Sarkeesian. Apparently she's oppressed. And yet she's making millions. Or at least John McIntosh is anyway. So, just to muse, when somebody ever says that white privilege, do mention the fact that for a long time, whites were slaves. There are great empires that span across the globe. The Ottoman Empire, for example, the Egyptian, I don't know if it can be called an empire, but they controlled vast amounts of land, and among them were white slaves. Remind them that history has a very different viewpoint on this thing, this white privilege. Remind them that there are millions of poor white children who are going without food, in the same nature there will be millions of black children going without food, at least in Western society apart. Remind them that in Eastern Europe, white countries are very poor, have a very poor standard of life. They have almost no advantages to being born there. So how can there be white privilege if these countries are suffering? If these white children are suffering? Surely, if there was some sort of hierarchy designed to benefit whites, the state would come along and say, well, here you go, here's your silver spoon. But that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen for the poor. Not very often. It's usually the poor helping the poor, or those who have prepared themselves out of poverty helping those below them. Because as we know, most people who are born into wealth are complete and utter psychopaths with no empathy in their bones. Not all, but most. So I say to those who preach white privilege, please ram it up your ass and go read a fucking book on history before your over-opinionation does some damage to the society we have and causes other race wars. And that may come when you create this victimhood. You give a reason for people to have this hatred of the others. Whether that be the riots, which causes distinctly liberal, non-aggressive white people to start viewing black people differently, or black people to view white people as oppressors, as dangerous, as toxic, as cancerous to society, and it cannot go on any further. It must stop. The victimhood must stop. It must stop because being a victim all your life will never get you anywhere. Just as I refused to be a victim of my circumstances and decided to work hard, educate myself, and eventually get to the point now where my bills get paid and I have some expendable income. And yes, I understand it's not an option for everyone. It's not an option based on where you live or where you're born. But that's a very few amount of people that applies to. Western society is full of opportunities if you can find it. And blaming others for your problems, blaming others for your situation, well, that's just unacceptable. And it makes you look like a pansy. This is PlebPolitics signing off. More videos to come. Feel free to subscribe. My Tumblr is also down in the link if you want to give that a little hit. Take care now, fellow plebs.